Great, thanks. Really appreciate you coming on. And so I had reached out to Sindraken because his post on Reddit really caught my attention. And I thought it was well put, talking about the surgical strike changes. So I think we've talked to death some of the recent indie changes, what's going on with mining crystals and mining waste, and all this attempt to end scarcity or whatever it is CCP is actually going to accomplish here and not accomplish. But I think one thing that's been missing from the conversation is all of the stuff that's been dropped along the way. As several people have pointed out, the protests in Jeddah and some of the things going on aren't just about these industrial changes or aren't just about things that haven't finished baking off of Singularity yet. There's also the real aspect that there are all these things that CCP has done in the past and promised in the past and has kind of just dropped like a hot rock and has left the game in a broken state, or at least in a compromised state, depending on how you want to look at it. And Surgical Strike definitely sticks out in my mind. The nerf to resists, the the very changed aspect for several hulls, everything ranging from fighters or freighters, excuse me, to PvP type ships, and so talk a little bit about some of your perspectives there, Sindraken, around Surgical Strike and around where you think CCP needs to pick that up from, especially in light of the recent changes that seem to be going live from Singularity. Yeah, definitely. So, you have broken down a few of the changes within Surgical Strike that have these lasting effects, and it doesn't seem like they've actually picked any of those up to revise them further. Yeah, fights are definitely not as protracted, especially if you want to fly cheap. I think what the times I've noticed this the most is the times that I've been in, especially like the non-faction cruisers, that sort of thing. Not that a T1 cruiser should be able to stand up against everything in the game, but they just pop now to the point that I don't see much point on docking them in anything except 100-man fleets. 100-man, 25-man, 50-man cormorant fleets are still going to do work. You're still going to have large fleets of thrashers able to do stuff with us, like seabowing each other with a gate camp and crap like that. But asymmetric warfare is really compromised by these resist changes, and especially lower end asymmetric warfare, wanting to use these cheaper ships. And I think that's something that really harms and affects small groups, especially. Yeah, at that point, I mean, it doesn't do anything. It's and that's what I think is really disappointing about these changes that have been made is that the performance gap. You mentioned about a T1 to T2 performance gap. That gap is so huge that I don't see what you do. Maybe I'm missing something here, but what do you do with T1 ships as a small gang outside of specific confines? Specific confines being things like FW plexes or certain abyssal actions, things like that. And even then, there's a strong limit to what you can really bring to bear because of these gaps and because of the nerf to resists, the T2 ammo being applied to faction guns, how reps work, all of those sort of things are really leave things in an awkward state. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with you. They're saying in Twitch chat they can't hear the other guy, which would be Sindraken. Let's see if we can resolve that. It should be working. No, I think there's something going on actually on my end here. It looks like it's not properly capturing. Let's see if we can fix it. Yeah, and it's turned up, but it's not even showing levels like bounce. We can try this, but that doesn't seem like it would work. Talk for a second, Karama.
Well, might check.
All right, I think that did actually sort of work. Maybe. We'll see. All right, sorry, go on. Hopefully now the audio is working correctly.
Yeah, looks like chat is happy now.
Cool, cool. Okay, sorry about that, folks. Yeah, you were only hearing one-sided conversation, the boring side. Okay. So yeah, for those of you just joined in, and for those of you who can now actually hear, Sindraken has been talking about some of the disappointing changes that happened during the surgical strike era and never really got picked up on. And I have mentioned this briefly a few shows ago. The whole approach of quadrants actually backs CCP into a corner about what they can change and what they can affect in the game. And what I mean is they have to go through these cycles to make things seem new and exciting. Hey, we're doing something new now. We're doing something big and significant. And now what we're doing is we're doing prosperity. Now what we're doing is scarcity. Now what we're doing is PvP changes with surgical strikes. So they go through these quadrant changes, right? Then it's time for a new quadrant, and the pressure is there to only affect the things that they've advertised. And this just goes back to the infinite sermon of CCP needs a mode for iterative changes, small iterative changes, because otherwise, driven by their own publicity and driven by their own way that they framed these quadrants, they necessarily just leave things dropped that have to get picked back up and have to get addressed.
Yeah, like iterating and small balance changes and stuff like this is something that should be happening constantly and not just once and then maybe we look back at it in 5 years. That should just be a thing that they always do. And then the next thing, Cradance, okay, now you have a certain length for your death cycle and you have to do something within that, and it doesn't work out really well now, does it?
Yeah.
So something that Paradox actually does is they've got two. So on Stellaris, right, they come out with these big expansions, which are kind of like quadrants, where essentially they pick one thing, one part of the game to focus and improve on. But they also have a custodians team, which pushes out much smaller free updates that make these sort of changes. And so what I'm thinking, the quadrants are kind of like the big expansions, whereas CCP needs like a smaller team of people. I don't know, they could call them the gatekeepers, like something, but it could sort of fill the same role that the custodians fill in Stellaris, in that their job is to make small iterative changes to things, whereas they're not exactly bound to the quadrant system.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we heard a lot of about Team Talos back when they did a bunch of these small balance changes with Team Talos doing this kind of stuff, and that was great. I mean, it's small stuff on the side, and most of these changes were awesome, like changes to weapon systems and such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there was a good path of changes there for a bit that were smaller and quite meaningful. I actually thought, I'm not going to say it was perfectly implemented if there weren't tons of bumps along the way, but I thought Tiraside overall was a very good idea and needs to continue. It created
Yeah,
a.
even if it's not really meaningfully improving the balance or anything, just changing things up once in a while keeps things fresh.
That's true. That's true. Just the effect of change for sure. And I think there's some missed portions of the game that could be changed in this way to give that sort of freshness. But something like Tiraside is a good example because for the most part, with a few changes, especially around capacitor boosters, but for the most part, it didn't drastically change the way people were fitting ships so much as simplify some of the naming conventions, or at least attempt to simplify them. You know, we can argue about how well that was done with, say, shield hardeners versus armor hardeners and stuff like that, but it at least had a. There was a method to it, and I think that's really the thing people are frustrated with right now is with these changes. It's a question of like who's it for, who's it actually most positively affecting, and I don't want to infinitely hash out those recent changes again and again because I think we've beat that dead horse to a bloody pulp.
Yeah,
But
but seeing who's positively affected with surgical strike, nobody is. I
yeah,
mean,
exactly. Like,
Genkas maybe. Genkas can do ganks in smaller
and
groups.
even then, so it's kind of interesting, right? Because with the resist nerf, you're right. Gankers get a benefit, but around the surgical strike era, I specifically remember code flipping out on Reddit and elsewhere, and about talking about between them and Stain Guy talking about how ganking and high sec piracy was effectively dead. Now, some of their complaints were really specious and just had to do with the fact that people were slowly getting smarter and realizing things like, hey, unaccompanied T1 freighters probably aren't the thing I should be taking through so much anymore, and there you saw a little bit less of that. But some of their points were valid around these changes because there was an offset between there's an offset period between the resists, nerfs, and buffs that have gone through, and the changes to the efficacy of the ships they're bringing to gank. And high sec piracy and the catalyst ganking and all that stuff, not my cup of tea. I would not enjoy it. Not something I would ever log in to be like interested in doing. But it is a valid playstyle. It is something very valid to
Yeah,
eve.
people do that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
if CCV gives more hit points or resistance, okay, you bring a few more alts to do your gank. It's gonna be fine.
yeah. And that's the interesting thing, right? Is that some of this is like, well, it could just be solved with n+1. The immediate problem there is now you are drastically compromising anyone conducting asymmetric warfare. And they may be conducting that because they want to. You have groups that left very large blocks, groups like Waffles. You have groups that are within large blocks, like my own corp, like your corp, Syndraken, that prefer to engage in some small to medium content as well. So we specifically set up things where instead of pinging and and getting 150 beans into a fleet, we say let's take these 20 people or 15 people or 10 or 5 people and go
Yeah,
do something.
absolutely. I mean, everyone who comes to Softdev visiting our pocket, you're gonna get a small gang fight if we can engage it. But if it's 10 guys, then you're already at the threshold. We need Logi, we need Ewo, we need stuff like this to deal with 10 people. It and 10 people is not a huge fleet size.
Yeah, I want to see, I want to see small and medium gang within Eve really benefit from diversity. In other words, that bringing E-War has a drastic benefit. That bringing the front logi, even the frig logi, has a drastic benefit. But I feel like the changes that Surgical Strike dropped upon us just basically meant that either whoever's gonna bring out the hacks and bring the T2 cruisers are going to win, or whoever's just gonna start N+1ing it. And I think that's pretty
Yeah,
disappointing.
this or simply high alpha strike doctrines, or you can do so much boring stuff to avoid a fight in that size
Yes.
bracket.
Yeah, I think see. I believe that fundamentally, there's not a whole lot CCP can do to prevent people from, so to speak, gaming the system to avoid fights. Meaning that you're always going to have these kitey doctrines, these high alpha doctrines, and things. People are going to develop ways that they can get the kills with lower risk. What I don't want to see is CCP leaving balance changes on the table, like they did with Surgical Strike, that unduly benefit them with very little way to retaliate except doing the same thing. Requiring a mirror to a high alpha strike, requiring a mirror to Kaidi, requiring an N+1 tactic should not be our only recourse. And I think that's kind of where Surgical Strike left us. And I think it's a good kind of synecdoche of all the changes that have been happening. Because these things just get left on the table and they are supposed to have a logic and they're supposed to bring a better PvP experience in this case. Just like the recent changes are supposed to bring a better industrial and economic benefit, but they don't ever quite get there because they drop it for the next quadrant. And then we get into these awkward things like you called out in your post. Which I'll drop that post, by the way, into chat if you want to take a read. I think it is a good read. I think Sindraken's done a good job of documenting some of the pains and woes. I think it's pretty apt.
Yeah, I just sat down and wrote down a few points that were coming to my mind. I'm sure I could rant a little bit longer if I really wanted to.
Well, and I think one of the things with Surgical Strike, though, too, is that you now have cruisers that are insanely cheap, almost throwaway, but they're also really easy to lose. So I guess, do you think that if they were to receive sort of a buff and to make them more survival and a little bit more viable, would there be, I guess, an increase in cost?
Well, if you're losing ships less often, uh, and they're not getting replaced as quickly, then it changes the demand cycle. So if anything, the instant reaction, the sooner term reaction, will be less being bought, thus a surplus in inventory, thus a drive down in price. But ultimately, what happens whenever there's a change like this, right? If we look back to some of the changes in the past around resists, or changes in the past around damage application, changes have happened, for example, with missiles and explosion velocity, stuff like that in the past. What we've seen is that eventually a balance comes forth where people say, okay, well, we can't. It used to take this to take on this kind of fleet, or to take on this kind of ship, and now it's going to take this. It used to take this kind of fitting, now it's going to take this kind of fitting. To a certain extent, I think that fitting and Eve and how you undock a ship should, to a reasonable amount, be an arms race, but that arms race is always balanced, right? Because you can say, well, why don't I just officer fit this Thrasher and then I can go beat any cruiser I want, right? Until 10 cruisers pile on you and all the officer guns in the world aren't going to save you. The perspective should be that there is a shift to the meta because of new strengths brought forth. But I think the only way that you can meaningfully express it is with, I can't say it enough, small iterative changes. Making smaller changes that don't come all at once. And I don't see why CCP doesn't connect to that, given the fact that so many other games with a deep meta talk about things where people actually nerd out in some kind of third party application or in game application and sit there and talk about zero point 0.1 versus zero point 0.2 of something, 1% versus 2% of something. Every other game like that that I can think of generally centers around an iterative change mindset, a smaller set of changes that are more focused. Even if there are bigger changes, of course, that come around, that just necessarily has to happen. Even when those big changes come around, there's lots of smaller changes in between them, and that's what keeps the game fresh, but also
Yeah,
keeps a
also
balance in the metagame.
the kind of communication we got around the surgical strike was that it's about capitals. Like we want to get rid of these capitals, and CCP, like from their communication, they didn't even think about Tech 1 cruisers versus Tech 2 cruisers. The resistance gap is going to make a difference.
Yeah.
Like stuff like this, you make a big change like this, it's going to affect everything. Like, yeah, everything.
Yeah, that was. You're right. The whole announcement, the whole time frame release of Surgical Strike was kind of tone deaf because talking about capital warfare, talking about creating a more vulnerable state for caps, which I'm not even sure was the actual problem to begin with. We can go into that. Trying
Oh,
to create that vulnerable state, and then releasing these blanket changes didn't apply to specific hulls. They just applied to the way resists work. And you saw the EHP of ships that, according to the marketing, according to the words on paper of what CCP said they were trying to do, shouldn't even have been affected, but they were. And whenever
I
you
mean,
change something,
on a quite mediocre fit, you got like 25% less effective hit points just from that because of the way
sounds right.
the stacking works.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's not ridiculous, I think. It's just what you would fit on a normal ship.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Like, I think, especially with the surgical strike, like, I don't think anyone was, cared. Like, I think a lot of people generally agreed that, yeah, no, capitals should be a little bit more vulnerable when they're unescorted and when it's just them. Yeah, totally, that's cool. But in
Yeah, okay,
CCP
but
faction,
vulnerable. They already made a lot of application nerfs so that the capital cannot really defend itself, and they made the sign changes. So capitals are vulnerable. Now we don't have them in space anymore to shoot at all. That's dumb.
right?
Yeah,
And I
I
think
go ahead.
surgical strike was before the cat before all the sign changes and the application changes, right?
I think it was a mixed bag. Like they did multiple rounds of the capital changes. And I think surgical strike was somewhere in the middle of this whole thing going on.
Yeah, Surgical Strike went live April 15th of 2020. So it was before most of these other changes. It actually kind of preceded them, but then there were several changes like it was kind of before the major push towards scarcity, and it was part of the Eclipse. It was the part of the Eclipse quadrant from 2020. There needs to be a fundamental revisiting of PvP interactions. And the balancing really doesn't need to be around capitals. I think there's this heavy emphasis on capital proliferation, and I don't think you solve it by trying to do sweeping changes to resists and that sort of thing. Because uh, when we talk about capital proliferation, it's important to be clear here that we're not saying every player in the game has 10 capitals they can undock and that they're just like Corvettes to them. Is that the large blocks have this massive stash of capitals that they can employ, and it creates a power imbalance that's not approachable.
Yeah, but those capitals aren't going away just because you
Exactly.
make them super expensive. What that just means is that
That
another group, like,
preserves the imbalance. Yes, it
yeah,
preserves the
like
imbalance.
how is Brave ever gonna reach a position where they con- uh, can beat the Imperium? It's not gonna happen.
No, and I mean, how are we going to have a major rise of a new block? Which I think would be a
Yeah,
fascinating thing to happen in the metagame, and it has happened in the past in Eve. Look at
like I'm actually surprised that a lot of these old groups that are barely doing anything, they also don't really atrophy. There's no space to really build something new because yeah, you're gonna have to rent space from Horde or something, and then you never have the money to build up a fleet, and now you can't even build capitals to ever challenge them. It's yeah,
yeah. I think if you made changes that made PvP at all scales more enticing, you end up solving a lot of issues because there will be a natural draw to get out and PvP. The way that CCP has had effectiveness in Eve, the way that the game has kept alive for nearly 20 years, is because people want to undock and go do stuff with their friends and go goof off whatever that may be with, whether it's with dreads, whether it's with cruisers, whatever.
yeah.
I
And
don't think that you.
speaking of the capital issues on the large scale, there was also a lot of this grabbing content, small game content. So
Sure.
all these PvE capitals in space were a great thing to have. The real issue was, in my opinion, that the umbrella was so efficient and easy to deploy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely I
Like
have
getting
specific
those on
memories
off a
of.
gate is not fun, but
Yeah, I have specific memories of
shooting
being
a
dropped.
carrier is a lot of fun. It's yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with you. I have specific memories of being dropped on with by Hall Titans and my cruiser gangs, and that obviously represents a gross kind of imbalance that needs to be addressed. I don't think that you address it by just opening up every possible way to change this and then just leaving all of those half done. And a big part of that is if you want to see capitals die, give people an incentive
To
to feel that
actually
they can
unlock
field
them.
them.
Yeah.
And they will not feel they can field them. I don't care whether it's, the large null blocks, if it's Imperium and Horde and groups like that that have the funding, have the capability, they're not even going to field capitals at the same level of aggression because when it was getting up to, upwards to 8 billion to fit a T2 Dread, you didn't see an appetite there. It doesn't
I
it
mean,
doesn't
even
raise
with
a
the go,
point.
if even while the war was ongoing, what it really was about is babysitting Sino-Germans for 10 months. That was that was all this war was about, because like Tapi did not want to drop their capitals in a position of danger, and neither did really the Imperium want to do something stupid. So we had to wait until M2 happened
Yeah,
to see that one big capital fight, and there should have been 10 of these fights across the war.
right. Right. I agree with you, and I think we saw there that was and that was essentially the beginning of these changes, meaning that was before the full intensity that we've witnessed more recently.
Yeah, but it
around
was
how
already
unviable the
announced.
capitals
Like
are.
the whole industry changes and that the everything's getting more expensive and so on. That was all already happening, and
Hmm.
people just didn't want to use their capitals. Like at least that's how I received it. In the early stages, where people still were having those threads for 1 billion ISK lying around, people were using them. Like we saw a lot of hard threads dying here and there, carriers stuff going on.
Yep.
People, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I whelped my Phoenix that was like it was like 1.5 billion or something like that because I bought it
Oh,
back in
that's
the day.
awesome.
So I went out and blew it up. Now, I think that there should be an investment to capitals. I am not. I enjoy capitals. I enjoy capital PvP. I think it's one of the funnest aspects of PvP for me. But I also enjoy the small gang, that sort of thing. I think capital should hurt to lose. I am not uh, going to change that opinion. But
I mean, I don't think 2 billion is something anyone can just shrug off. Like you're gonna have to have some serious
exactly,
income to do that.
there's a balance to all of this, and because you can make this argument like you can make an argument like this. Well, there are people with trillions of ISK, and to them 2 billion is nothing. But you have to understand the people with trillions of ISK. There's three things about them. One, you're right, 2 billion is nothing. 10 billion is also nothing. Like you need to understand how much a trillion is. Like there's a great YouTube video that shows how much $1 trillion would be, and like shows it like stacking and stacking hundreds until it zooms out to show you a trillion. So yeah, you got to understand that the ISK trillion is like that. Two, there's not that many ISK trillionaires. Three, those aren't the people you balance the game around. You balance the game around the player that can reasonably play the game and is going to play the game at a certain scale and expectation.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
for like a trillion is a person with trillions of ISK, like they're not throwing around like they're YOLOing their titans at that point.
Yeah, yeah, they're always going to have their faction titans or whatever. They're always going to have different outlets, and they're an extreme minority that we don't need to worry about. I do agree that if you're not, so someone in chat said if you're not willing to pay for caps, you don't need them. I completely agree with that. It should hurt. It should have a cost. It should be a reality. The problem with things like surgical strike coupled with these economy changes isn't just, oh, well, now it's more expensive to have those caps. It's A, now it's more expensive to have those caps. B, those caps are less significant than they ever were. Let's not even talk about Hall Titan
and
removal
there
because that
is
was a
no
good thing.
capitals to shoot
But
at. Like I've
C,
lost two
yes,
capital
exactly.
ships in my entire EVE career. I don't really care about them, but there's nothing to shoot at.
Yes, there are less targets, there's less things to engage with. When I say I like capital PvP, I am not the type of person that thinks it's really fun to drop on like some random cruiser gang and a bunch of carriers and super carriers and laugh it off. I think it's
That's
much
the
more
thing
fun.
CCP really should have addressed. Like just the ridiculous effectiveness of umbrella tactics. And the
Yes,
sign-up changes kind of did that. Like
right.
we
The
never
sign of
got to really
changes.
see, was it enough? Was it just that what's needed? Or is this already that people just don't unlock them anymore?
We
We
can't
never
tell if
got
those
to
are
see that
enough.
because then the prices got so stupid high.
Right. We can't
So
tell if
yeah,
those are enough because they got shrouded by a plethora of other random changes to economy, to hull types, to everything. So we
yeah,
didn't get a
but
chance for that to actually
imagine the
play
amount
out.
of whaling content and small game PvP we used to have, but just without the boson traps and shit everywhere.
Hmm.
And just having enough time to run away from a capital drop would do that.
Yes. Yep.
So now you burn a bunch of fuel and you don't get kill mails, so it's kind of boring.
So I want to talk about risk aversion a little bit as a concept within Eve. So I've mentioned before the opinion that you're always going to find people who will, game the system, so to speak, and look for a way to reduce the risk of their PvP activities. Meaning they're always going to find a
That's
way.
fair.
Yeah, and that's just the way it is. That's the reason Eve is so fascinating is because it has so many parallels to what people will do in real life. People in real life will also find ways to cut out work, right? To be lazy, to get more out of less. And there are always people who are going to create a risk aversion because, hey, it's fun to win. Which means you're not going to ever remove that out of the game without doing something that would absolutely murder Eve, which is to create perfect mirrors of everything. Make it so everything is kitey, everything is, do the WoW approach. Just to add huge numbers to everything until it all implodes on itself.
I mean, what we do need is some incentive to take those risks. I mean, look at
Yes.
Podschwen, it's kind of dangerous, but doing this side shits out trillions of ISK. So people are in Podschwen fighting and doing PvE. It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that we have good examples of things going on from a PvP activity that
And
show up in these.
personally, for me in Nullsec was always a lot of fun having my Myrmidon out in space, waiting for hunters, and then creating small game PvP on those open grids with bait Myrmidons.
One
Yes.
thing that I think
That's
is
that's
interesting.
just a thing. Like looking at the old Vexor Navy issues would have been awesome for that, but barely anyone does that because you're gonna lose money doing this. You get a lot of PvP content. That's nice for me, but you're gonna lose money doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think what's interesting too is that in order to actually like make money, especially in the era of post scarcity, you need these big expensive ships to make any comparable amount of money. And because of that, people are a little bit more risk averse. Like if
Yeah,
I was
I've
able
already
to,
unsubscribed my Myrmidon alts because it's just so much effort to yeah to pay for PvP ships. It takes an hour of Myrmidon rutting to pay for a single battle cruiser. So it adds up quickly with the scarcity prices and stuff. And using a Marauder or something, then okay, I don't want to lose this. So I'm going to be careful. I'm not going to create any content for a hunter coming by because I'm going to warp away before he arrives.
So
and I think
go ahead. Sorry.
I was about to say, and I think that like making it so that these cheaper ships can replace themselves very easily and make money. Like, yeah, people are going to make a ton of money, but maybe I just think that people are more likely to be out in space if they can replace their ratting ships easier, essentially.
Absolutely. I mean, something I would like is just anomalies that always have something to point you when you're going there. So people are automatically discouraged from putting something expensive in there. But there's now this content, this Myrmidon or Ishtar, or whatever it is. It's pointed, it's going to be available, and maybe you can pay a little bit more for that. That would be an incentive to put yourself at risk.
Or maybe have it to where like certain sites capitals can't go in. You know, like have gate restrictions to certain sites.
Possible, sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we already have. There's already Dead Space content that works
Yeah,
into
but
some of
you
those.
actually have to scan those down. Like
Right. Right.
if you have local open and a descan, then you're not gonna lose your paladin in a 10 out of 10.
Yeah. I think that I always want to see every activity in Eve carry a risk, and more specifically, I appreciate the high risk, high reward gameplay factors in Eve much more than the low risk, low reward, or the low risk, high reward, which should never happen, in my opinion. There should never be a case like that.
Like
But
Abyssal
unfortunately, there are
PvP.
several that are that way.
Yeah, Abyssal PvE. It's kind of ridiculous. You can make 400 million ISK per hour in a road shot wormhole if you want to.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. Actually, I think it is overtuned. Um, but with that high risk, high reward, that means that every activity you do to earn ISK should have an opportunity for a PvP conflict to begin with it. So you mentioned like using your Myrmidons to basically create bait, which is nice. I like that. Like, if I'm out with a gang and we go to tackle an Ishtar, we get to tackle a Myrm. My secret hope every time is that it's bait. Like I think
Yeah,
with IFT,
yeah,
I frequently tell people like always take the bait, take every bait, and yes, you could lose fleets that way. That's fine.
yeah.
But
I
what I'm
mean, no one,
hoping
no
is for a
one cares
PvP
about that
opportunity.
Myrmidon or some
Yeah,
mining barge they catch. It's about doing something interesting, and shooting a rat is not interesting.
it's poking the bear. I want to shoot the Myrmidon. I want to tackle the Ishtar in hopes that some fleet is going to come fight me. That's actually there to do PvP. So
Yeah,
I
and,
never
and
want to
that comes
remove
back to
those
this
opportunities.
surgical strike thing because the kind of engagement bracket is just so messed up. You get a few too many people and just everything dies. You gotta have to run away.
You're not wrong.
So that's another thing. Fights that don't happen because earlier you said well, maybe stuff is not gonna die as much. But yeah, what about the fights that don't happen because you see there's already too much and you just don't even bother engaging?
Yeah, the problem is that with these changes to economy and the ships being weaker, we are now at this weird intersection where since I've played Eve, this is the weakest and most expensive almost every kind of ship has ever been.
Yeah, so taking risks, you're playing the game wrong at this point.
Yes, because the factor to earn back that ISK, the time it takes, like Karama was saying earlier, you should be able to replace what you risk. The
Yeah,
factor to earn that back is so high, it's prohibitive, and it makes things terribly unfun, which is disappointing because in Eve, what was always cool was that, if you lost a ship or something, you're like, oh, okay, well, that's back to ratting for me, back to mining for me, back to whatever your activity is to generate the ISK industry, whatever. But it wasn't like, now I need to do 6 times more of that than I ever got to do in PvP to create that same cycle. And the people this hurts the most, just to be clear, are the newcomers and the people who are in their, let's say, mid-game phase, meaning they're not quite new to the game, but they haven't been around terribly long to build up a wealth generation, to build up a source. The longer you've been playing this game, especially the more connections you formed in that time, the more things you figured out, the actual less impacted you are from these changes. So all of these changes that were supposed to solve things like capital proliferation, whatever that may mean, actually end up not affecting the people who most caused the problem they're complaining about.
So here's my thing, right? When it comes to capitals versus subcaps, the argument of, well, if people are making tons of money, aren't they just going to buy more capitals? Well, yeah, but here's the thing. Then what you can do is you can make it to where capitals are only good at a certain type of content. Maybe they're not good at PvP, or maybe they're only good at certain sites that you can do. Like maybe capitals can only do those rogue drone sites, right? And then maybe you have it to where subcaps are so much more viable and they make a ton of money so that people are more incentivized to use subcaps. Well, then you've got people saying, okay, well, then people are just going to buy the most expensive subcaps. But the thing is I'm personally okay with that because you don't see people running around and dominating with massive amounts of subcaps. Like Goonswarm having thousands of like subcapital ships, I'm okay with that because subcapital ships die very easily.
Well, and also there's a limit to the attractiveness of what you can do in those large subcap fleets. You need to have an objective, and you're not just going to drive subcaps around, massive subcap fleets around, to just go whale on everything in sight. That's prohibitive. It's cost prohibitive. It's time prohibitive. It's fun prohibitive. So Seeds had said in chat about ISK being the reward. I don't think that's what we're saying. I won't speak for Sindraken or Kurama here, but what we're really talking about when we talk about this ISK generation and the replacement, I only do anything besides PvP and Eve so that I can PvP more. That's my only
Yeah,
thinking with it. I
yeah,
don't really like. I know there are people who log in just to do industry. There are people who log in just to do these different PvE activities, and that's fine. I respect that style of gameplay. It's not for me, and it's not for a lot of people I know. Uh, the motto for our corp, and I know a lot of other corps and people feel the same way, is we don't make ISK to make more ISK. We make more ISK so we can PvP, and that's really
that's
the
absolutely true.
challenge.
Like I don't like giving CCP money for Plex so I can afford to PvP. That shouldn't be a thing. If I cannot in game achieve the resources to afford my PvP, then the game is broken. That's
I actually agree with you. I agree with you, and I think Plex, and I know not all people feel this way, but I actually think Plex should always be an option. I appreciate that it exists. I appreciate the business model, and I think it's very valid within Eve because plexing and getting 1,000 chips isn't going to make you a great pilot. It's just going to mean you're going to lose all that stuff. It
yeah.
should always be
I,
an
I
option, but it
think it's
shouldn't
I
be.
think it's great as long as you have it as an option. But
Yes,
if you have to do this in order to PvP, then we're crossing into pay to win territory because the person who
absolutely,
doesn't want to pay cannot afford the
absolutely.
PvP. So now it's yeah.
It is currently very cost prohibitive to PvP in Eve. This is the most cost since I've started playing. This is the most cost prohibitive to PvP at all sizes that I've seen. I think
Yeah, especially like small gang engagement and stuff. If you look at my killboard, I kill a lot of shit, but I can easily.
I don't know what happened there. All right, pretty cool. Hopefully back alive. Computers, man. All right, looks like we're good. Sorry about that, everybody. It just decided it was done being a functional computer. Nice, nice. Okay, good, good. Yep, I think we're live. People in chat are saying it's good. So, we were talking about the expense. Yeah, the cost effectiveness. Because just to be clear, when we're talking about this cost effectiveness, it's not just about whining about ISK. The factor you play E for is a fun per hour. Mm-hmm. Sounds right. Yeah, and it's it's the combination of the fact that it's more expensive with yeah the grind to fight ratio exactly, and it's not just about it being oh it's more expensive to replace stuff now because of the failure to end scarcity. It's because the ships themselves are actually less significant. The ships themselves are actually less capable. Oh, all right. Give me a second. Why? 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 No, I see why. All right. Now you should be unmuted.
Hello, hello.
There we go. Yeah, it changed my. It crashed and deleted my settings. It's pretty cool. I paid
That's
extra
very
for that
kind.
feature.
Yeah.
If the only change that happened was, hey, now this stuff that used to be running you a billion to 2 billion a week was now 3 to 4 billion a week. That alone tunes down the fun per hour that can be had, right? And you can make this argument, well, this means you need to fly cheaper, and this means that cheaper stuff will become more effective because it proliferates more. But that
Yeah,
keeps
but then you do
ignoring.
surgical strike and torpedoes that goal, so it's kind of not working out, is it?
It's not working out. You're right, and it also just keeps ignoring the fact that you're still the people that hurt the least, that suffer the least from this, are the people that supposedly these changes were all caused by. In other words, that uh,
If you have a stack of Titans flying around, you make mad money. If you have a stack of super carriers or dreadnoughts, even like dreadnoughts
right,
is the one thing that still gets used kind of frequently in bigger combat situations. You make 500% every time you sell one, and nobody built one ever
yes,
since the scarcity shit started.
yes,
So that's all stockpiles being converted at huge profit. So there we have the kind of what about new players? Like, how are you ever gonna catch up to someone who made 500% profit from of stockpiling?
and it's always been a challenge in Eve, right? It's always been a challenge of like, what is can a new player catch up, or what does that even mean? And there's always going to be a lack of equity in Eve because of its fundamental design, and I think that's okay. I think
I
it's
mean, I think
okay
I
that
can
there's a
speak to
lack of
that as
equity.
a 2017 player. I started out and I never used any skill injectors, which I'm kind of proud of. But yeah, kind of getting into the groove was kind of hard, especially at the start, especially with the Magic 14 and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
once I got there, it's kind of okay. You can fly normal stuff. You maybe play a year more to get your super carrier and then maybe a Titan or stuff. But it was assailable. Right now, I don't think I can catch up to any one of these players who have been around longer than me. It's
Right.
just not gonna happen. How am I gonna afford a Titan ever?
And I think the thing is that because I've seen in this defense, I've seen this statement like, well, you shouldn't really think of the game that way because those people have been playing for years and years. So when you've played that long, then you'll have those advantages. The problem is with the way that the current design goes, not only will those kind of people not have those advantages, they won't be able to catch up to those who've been playing long. They won't be able to catch up. I have only been playing since 2014. But people starting now won't be able to catch up to where I am. That's not a bragging thing. That's not I've done something so amazing. It's just that I was able to acquire and build a system of wealth within Eve that doesn't exist anymore. And because the streams don't exist, and it's not about quantity of ISK, it's about quality of gain. And that gain always has to be looked at. Forget how much ISK things are, forget the actual cost. It's always a balance of fun per hour and risk versus reward. And right now, you would have to put too much risk in to enjoy the same kind of play styles. And those kind of play styles were never the problems of proliferation. Nobody said there's too many nano cruiser gangs roaming around. There's too many frigate gangs undocking. Nobody's ever said any of that stuff. What people were talking about
There's
was,
never enough content. Like
yes,
the
there's
more
never enough. There's
content, the
too
more alive Eve Online, the better the game is gonna be.
absolutely. There's hundreds of systems, right? There's hundreds of systems within Eve. There's all these regions, 64 regions, and all these places you can go. And it's so hard to try to find that content to fight, and it feels so rewarding when you get to it. So everybody is happy when more people undock. But what has to be realized with these changes, and with the lack of changes, the lack of following up on things like surgical strike, the lack of following up on things like the scarcity, uh, that it is hurting all of that content source. If you
Yeah,
want to
another
address
thing that
capitals, do it.
especially
But this isn't
hurt
the way.
Nussek was the bounty modifier system. Like this
Oh yeah,
this
the
this
BRMs.
god
Yeah.
awful shit. Like like I've told you, I've been literally feeding myrmidons in order to create content, and this shit still went below 100. So it's not a risk modifier.
Mm-hmm.
I get angry when people tell me it's a risk modifier because it's not. It's just punishment for living in North.
Yes. Yes. It risk mod. I agree with you. The risk modifier is poorly named. Uh,
It's ridiculous. And if that thing would function in a way that it rewards people for taking fights, maybe we would see more content in Northsec.
yeah. There is a serious lack of reward for all PvP interactions right now. But the only thing that keeps me out there PvPing is that it's just so fun to actually do. The activity is fun,
I
and
play the
that's
game
that's the
for
sad thing. Is
PvP. Yeah, it's not something I deal with. I want to PvP. That's why I play this game. But
yes,
yeah, I'm not gonna spend extra money on ships because CCP is greedy.
yes, yes. I agree with you. If you want to encourage people to to monetize, if you wanted to encourage people to engage in your costly services, things like Plex, things like game time, things like cosmetic type things, the base game has to be rewarding. It has to provide a fun per hour. Like the way CCP was successful for years, back to the first times that you could buy Plex. And even back, let's not go too far into curses and the whole RM scandal and the monocles and what have you. But the successes came from the fact that the game was fun to play, rewarded a fun per hour, and you felt like, oh, I can get this extra advantage. I can cut out some time. It's basically a time replacement. For example, the first thing that many people learn about Eve, or one of the first things they ever hear about Eve is, oh, well, you don't even have to pay for a subscription. You can just do stuff in game. You earn ISK in game, and then you can use that and buy Plex, and you never even have to pay for a sub, which is
Yeah, a lot
technically
of people
true.
start because of that.
But yeah, but here's the thing. Um, free, like not having to pay money to have your Eve sub, is only free if your time is worthless. I think someone had actually done some math and figured out that if you mowed lawns, that you could actually subscribe twice as fast as doing any given activity in game, and that was before scarcity. They had done that math, so I'd hate to see what it
Yeah,
looks like
that's
now.
easy enough. But okay, if you wanna do this, you can do tier 6 abyssals, you can afford your packs. It's not that big a deal once you have the skills and the capital to buy that shit and
Hmm. Hmm.
implant it. It's still possible, but not for every play style.
Yeah, and
Yeah, but And like, I don't mind buying a subscription. I had 3 subscriptions at one
Yeah,
point for
that
my
that's
arts and stuff. Like, when the company is doing well and not annoying me with every patch they release, then I'm more than happy to spend money on their product.
yeah.
But
I've never felt
right
upset
now,
about
I'm
subscribing.
spending no money on CCP.
Yeah, it's there was this point, this balancing point, where it was possible to do things like that. And I have accounts that I've been able to plex, through income generation sources in Eve. But you're right, my main accounts that I use, I sub them, and I'm happy to do so as long as the game stays balanced around that fun per hour. I do expect out of Eve versus many other games, it's not a game I just fire up and immediately start playing with no ramifications. Not to say that I don't sometimes just jump right in because someone pinged a fleet and I was like, oh, that looks fun, let's go, screw around in frigates or whatever, and then log off. But I also understand that everything I do has a cost and effect, and I have to spend some more time in the game. I don't mind time sinks in the game. I don't mind that I have to create ISK generation in the game to keep playing the playstyle that I want. The
Yeah,
problem is
I
that it's
mean, for
less
me,
rewarding
that's
than
that's
ever
also part of
for
the
a weaker
experience.
PvP.
Yeah.
Like, the only thing that's improved about PvP in the past several patches, and I'm talking going back from end of 2019 to where we are now, the only thing that's improved about PvP, in my opinion, if anything, is meta, and that's people figuring things out. There's some clever things people have figured out. There's some interesting engagement styles, some cool fleets I've seen run around, some interesting things that I'm working on with others, and that's all fun and good.
I
But
mean,
what has
there was
CCP
a
actually
there was a
generated for
moment in
us?
time where those bushing fleets became quite prominent, and then CCP instantly nerfed the playstyle with the
Yes,
bushing fleets. That was kind
yes.
of
Well, and
sad.
you have the people who do the PvP and industrial ships, and they're complaining about these recent changes because, yeah, there's some drone bandwidth changes and things like that coming to some of the industrial ships, but like the bait procurer is dead, and so are several other styles.
Yeah,
Now you have to
why,
try
why,
bait
why can't
skiff
they
and
leave
stuff.
a few mid slots on there? God damn it!
Yeah, no kidding. They
Like
killed them.
like
Like,
mid
what does that
slots, you
do?
you, you, you you fit some web disruptor in the web and the prop mod, and you get a bait procurer. It's not gonna break the economy to have a bait procurer.
Exactly. No one, no one was complaining about bait procurer proliferation, but yet here we are. Here we are. All right. So I want to switch topics real quick, sorta. I want to talk about what's happening uh, in the wider scale and talk about some solve changes because I think there might be a link here we can find, and it has to do with the economy of solve campaigns. Okay, so first of all, looking through the recent set of changes for Sov, there's some of the typical stuff that you expect. Uh, NC Dot has been building out space and cash for a while. Frat is still capturing the last few vestiges of what they didn't have in the north, and that was all going to happen. Um, let's talk about
DreadBomb
DreadBomb.
lost a lot.
Yeah, let's talk about DreadBomb losing 50 something systems in pretty short order and losing a bunch besides that. Now, from their perspective, from some statements that members of DreadBomb have made, is like, we don't care. Like, we're happy. It's a relief, and whatever. And I actually believe them. I believe that. I don't think it's copium necessarily to say that, because I think what's actually happening there is that this play style of DreadBomb, the way that Sedao was, from his claims, was trying to set up that group, was that they could focus on, well, dread bombing, and they could focus on a certain kind of PvP that had a high risk, high reward factor, and that their surrounding activities had to be a minimal investment, a minimal time investment, especially, so that the members could focus on the PvP aspects that the group was founded for. The
Yeah,
problem I see is
yeah,
that,
you worsen the grind to fight ratio, and groups like this just die out. It makes a lot of sense.
yeah, Snuff has always had this challenge, right? And the way Snuff has addressed it is interesting. Because the way Snuff has addressed it is that, hey, you need to deal with your own income generation. Snuff does nothing to help their members with income generation from a practical perspective. They just expect, you're going to be able to afford to replace your dreads or whatever, and afford to replace your ships, and that's kind of your business. It's not why Snuff exists. Dread Bomb largely took, from my understanding, largely took the same approach, but they also were doing this little renter business on the side, right? Most of their SOV was built around the idea that they had renters, they would reasonably protect those renters. They thought, well, hey, it'll be a chance, and it makes sense. If you follow it through from a logical perspective, it makes sense because, hey, If someone invades your renter space, if someone is harassing your renters, what can you do? Well, you could dread bomb them. That's a thing. That's one way you can create content. If they're tackling
Yeah,
your renters'
content
orgs,
generation. I mean, in a sense, they are like mercenaries. They are
mm-hmm.
protecting people in their soft. They want to grab. It's okay. They pay some rent, and they get their PvP content. It's great.
Yes. So I get it. I get the logic. The problem is that they tried to do this in an era that became increasingly prohibitive to that capability. And I can't say this enough. It's not just the scarcity changes that each dread is more expensive, each dread is less effective than they've ever been in history. Like maybe those with a longer Eve tenure can keep me honest here, but I don't think there's ever been a time in history where dreads have had less tank and less application.
Yeah, and I've never heard anyone complain about dreads being crazy dangerous or whatever.
Dreads
It's
weren't.
it's always fun and exciting when a dread shows up.
It's
You
fun
get
and
a crazy
exciting.
fight.
I think the thing people were complaining with dreads. So there was a while where because of the how cheap dreads were fit, how low cost and how high, how quickly you could generate that amount of ISK. You talked about the grind factor for them was the grind factor for dreads was so low. You saw 20 dreads dropping a gang of 5 cruisers and things like that, and it got a little ridiculous in several areas. Snuffed was guilty of this. Other groups were guilty of it. Like I said, I've been dropped by Hall Titans in my cruiser gang back in the day and things like that. That's
Yeah,
all
but that
stupid.
comes back to how easy it is to deploy a large number of capitals at once. It's not the one capital doing it; it's the mass of capitals doing it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, I that's the
And
points in Draken is
the same time frame also saw a Titan, a Crabbing Titan, die in Delph, if I remember correctly.
yeah, yeah.
That would be nice if we see stuff like this happen more often.
Yeah, actually, so I was excited when the capital anoms were announced before we had any idea what they would look like. I was kind of hoping that there'd be some kind of factor to them that would actually convince people to PVE on Titans again. Like there used to be not a big thing. It's
That
not
would
like
be
everybody's doing it,
amazing. I
but
mean, you got the special system. Make it so that the thing is actually pointed
mhm.
and kept in place while you do, and make a reasonable profit while doing it, so you can afford the replacement once it dies.
Yeah. So there was this interesting factor where like um I thought we would see some PVE Titans, like some people out there doing Titan PVE, and then quickly create Titan
And that's what
PvP,
we've
and
been
some
asking
interesting
for. Please
escalation
bring back
factors.
capital PvE so we get capitals to shoot at and bring this carrying
Yeah, and forget the
whaling
Rorquals,
content back.
honestly. Like, I'm not saying that the Rorqual
Yeah,
changes are good or that they, that
no,
it
no, the
screws
point
Rorqual
with the
pilots right and
Rorquals
left.
is the old Rorqual
But
before scarcity used to mine 5 times as much as an XU1. That was ridiculous. And we
yes,
told CCP that's ridiculous before it ever was implemented, that Rorqual was so ridiculous.
yes, it was.
So just and 2 years later we get a dev block saying, yeah, we're finally closing the gap. It should have done this years ago.
Well, the gap should have never been there. It was pretty obvious.
Yeah,
Pretty
yeah,
obvious. Like,
yeah.
it was pretty obvious what was going to happen. I think there's a lot of you can do a lot of armchair quarterbacking when it comes to game development, and you can say, oh well, if they had just known this or if they had just done this, and it's like, yeah, well, why didn't you make a game? But there are some things that were just painfully obvious, and a lot of people were saying it. There's a quorum of people from Imperium, people from Horde, people from Wormholes, people from small groups. So there's a large contingent of people who are saying, look, you're making these oracles, you're about to make an economy go bust.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it told this way that the Goonswarm CSM literally told CCP that we are going to break the economy if you do this.
Yep.
And CCP did it, anyways, and left it like this for what, 2, 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
And then another 2 years, and now they are closing the gap. Finally.
Finally. All right. So with these soft changes and the dread bomb, I think is motivated by the way this economy looks. I wanted to mention, by the way, like their way of protecting renters not very viable anymore, and I think that's actually what cost them the Sov more than anything. Because if you look at the Sov and you look at the actual fights, if you like pull up BRs in some of these regions, you're not going to find massive fights over the Sov. It just died. The TCUs just flipped. It got flipped by a bunch of various
If
groups. It
you
wasn't
have
any one person.
relatively low numbers of people operating in such a style, then
Yeah,
you're
the
gonna need those heavy ships.
DreadBomb is what? 780 members in total. That's the entire alliance. 780.
Yeah, but that's another thing. if it's like you have to defend some software or something, you have time to set up your capitals. If it's like dropping on a crab or on a rocker, maybe you don't have so much time to deploy an entire capital umbrella. That's something CCP should have worked on.
Yeah, yeah. So that aside, what is the most positive effect we can have right now for the new players and the mid-game players, given where they are? Is it picking up where Surgical Strike tried to leave off, or is it undoing the damage of Surgical Strike? Is it addressing these industrial inequalities? Is it fixing the base economic problems? Where do we start if the aim is to improve the quality of life for the new and mid-term players?
I would say make ships back to the prices they used to have, like especially the subcaps. Capitals can be like, I don't know, 2 billion is a pop, and then super capitals can be whatever. I don't care. Uh, Income, especially for nullsec, the bounty risk modifier has to either be fixed so it actually rewards risk taking, or just be abandoned.
So, all right, there's two things there. So cost adjustments and the BRM. Let's talk about the cost adjustments first. How do you adjust this cost? Because it's like CCP, it's a player-run market, right? So what changes does CCP need to affect to bring those costs back down?
I mean, it would be simply removing the stuff they added to those blueprints or the watering mod instead of adding
The
it
extra.
to our 4 moons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Like,
Okay, so
especially battleship production. I have a blueprint for my beloved Hyperion. I haven't used it because just I can't wrap my head around such complicated processes. There is a little bit of Tech 1 industry I always like to do for myself, like building my own rigs or stuff. But once it goes into Tech 2 or components or whatnot, I cannot. I cannot.
is it just the because I don't do much in the industrial side and the ship production. I should. I have alt set up that can do it, and I just never quite seem to get around it. But is it the complexity of doing those, or is it actually the cost of that material, or the time invested in that material that's prohibitive right now?
I mean, I've spent some time looking at it. If you just want to buy the materials of the market, you're going to make a loss. It's going to be more expensive than buying the stuff most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to figure out what kind of materials you need and then do the reactions and run some whatever to get the thing that actually goes in the final blueprint. And it's really kind of convoluted and complicated, at least for someone like me. So I can see why some people absolutely love this kind of vast industry system where you have to have a literal like supply chain and do your stuff. But making it so complicated is also inaccessible for like a simple-minded guy like me.
Sure. I think I'm always interested in that. I think this is true with mining. I think it's true with industry. Several aspects that aren't PvP and Eve. I want to see them have the same richness and depth that PvP has, especially from like if you think PvP tactics and fitting and some of that, the hours I've spent on Pyfa messing around with fits and the time I've spent on field learning from others or teaching others,
Yeah, I
some of the
believe there's
PvP
a lot
tactics.
of that kind of stuff that entices the industrial players. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
I can speak to that.
I, I,
I just like to pay someone for my nice ship, and then I'm a
yeah,
happy man.
I'm the same way. I'm the same way. Open market buy ship, and I know I can make it cheaper myself, whatever. But I'm just happy to give those industrialists my money and take and walk out with a ship and then go blow it up and cycle back again. Uh,
And that's another thing. Like you could do market trading and whatnot and build an imperium, make your trillion ISK, but most people don't.
yeah, and that's always a factor, right?
Yeah, and you kind of have to balance the economy around this lower end people who have like one or two activities they do to make ISK, and those
Mm-hmm.
people are supposed to be able to afford normal ships, like within a faction battleship, for example.
Yep.
That shouldn't be something fancy that costs you a week of grinding to replace that thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. Yeah, so First Camper said that there's a huge investment in time and money, and I've heard several industrialists say this, and that I've heard most of them say that the money investment is shifting drastically up, um, and that yeah, there's a main profits he says from your modules and drones, and
I mean, didn't they like release 50 billion ISK worth of new blueprints with all this industry revamp? Something huge, like on that order, I think it was. If you wanted to buy all the new blueprints.
yeah, I definitely have seen things
Yeah.
about blueprint
Yeah,
costs
maybe
going up.
someone in chat can answer this, how much this actually was. But I think it was something along those lines. Just investment in raw blueprints to be able to do the same things you did before.
Yeah, so I think there's kind of a consensus from a few industrialists in chat that it's reached a point where it does need to be a more focused career and a more focused effort, and also that there's once you get the hang of it, a lot of that complexity isn't so insurmountable, and I think that's good. Um, I want to see
But
it
then
be a
you come
complex
into
activity, but an approachable
tedious
complexity.
territory. Like I've tried to do PI, and it's just so much clicking and so much micromanagement.
Yeah, well, I think
And
it's
then I
universally agreed
stopped
that the
doing
PI
PI
interface
again.
is awful and always has been.
It's so god awful. I
Yeah,
have two characters where I trained those skills up simultaneously, and
well,
then I did it for 1 week. Then I stopped doing it because it was so god awful.
it's interesting, right? Because apparently P1's going into Moon, going into R4s, right? So,
Yeah, so
um,
that's gonna break PI. Like I think it's 20 times as much you can mine as much as you can do PI in one character.
I think what it will do is it will upscale PI and make PI. So since it is a very manual effort, since it is a more intensive thing, I think it will upscale PI and have people doing PI to get those higher tier materials, but make the lower tier materials more accessible. It
Yeah,
should
but then
hopefully remove
you're
some
gonna
tedium
have
for
to move around
industrialists.
huge amounts of P1 materials. Like they are really, really intensive on cargo space. So if you just wanna like break up moon rocks to get this and then move it all to your factory planets, it's gonna be a huge amount of effort.
Yeah, well, especially with the weight of I get unless they're going to change the PI material. So that's interesting. So first camper in chat said that the only P1 that's going in there is just the components for the T1 battleships. Um, so that's interesting. I had thought it was more P1 than that. So
Only for battleships, not even for faction ships.
that's interesting then. So what will that do? So maybe industrialists in chat can help us out here with thinking this through. What does that do to the economy, the price balance around battleships? Is there a hidden agenda here? If we're trying to get inside the heads of CCP producers and development around this change, is it besides the idea of removing tedium, possibly, we could argue whether it does or not, is there an effort here to make battleships more accessible? One, would it actually do that? Would battleships be more accessible because of this change? And two, is that a good thing?
Like, personally, I definitely want cheap Tech 1 battleships. Like they're like mainstay.
Also, like I said this before, like people weren't complaining about fleets of T1 battleships, so
Yeah, yeah.
I personally be okay with those.
It's one of these things. You get exciting when something like this shows up because it's gonna be fun.
I miss battleship brawling. I miss like
Yeah.
battleship roams used to be a thing people did, but last time I tried to fit, what was I fitting? It's just a couple weeks ago. I was gonna fit up a battleship to go take out. I think it was an APOC actually. I was just gonna fit out an apocalypse.
Yeah, that's gonna
There's a,
run you something like 600 million easy.
oh, it was like 750 for a fit that's supposed to be something that just gets blown up. Like this APOC is a joke fit almost. It's almost a meme
Yeah,
fit. I mean,
that's something you would filament
yeah,
and see where
exactly.
you end up.
That's actually
But
what it was for.
yeah,
And then like you look at like like standard nightmare fits. I'm not even talking about going
oh my
super
god.
blingy here. They're all a billion now, and used to
Have
be
you
able to do
tried
those.
fitting up a Bargus recently?
Oh, I didn't even. Yeah, I don't want to talk about bar gas post AT. I never want to say that word
Uh,
again. But
My
yes, I
biggest
agree.
like
They're out of
1.5 bill.
control. So if it does bring battleship and faction prices down, that could be interesting. I think I feel like there was this period that Eve missed where battleships could have been what dreads extremely quickly became. but it was missed because dreads were so accessible and the grind factor to attain a dread was so low. It's like, why use a battleship when a dread is a better battleship in every way?
Yeah, that goes back to surgical strike. Like
Yes,
nowadays, a
yes.
battleship that faces 10 torpedo bombers is dead instantly.
Mm-hmm.
Even even the heaviest tank marauder you could come up with, it's just gonna be dead.
Yep, yep. Because of those resist nerfs and because of the what you can get out of the hull is at a very bad. It's in a very bad place right now. That needs to be understood from
Yeah,
those
yeah.
changes. So, the new components that came out for battleships make up a third of the battleship prices. Okay, so that's interesting. So you're saying the production smurf to produce a battleship, a third of it is just those new components alone. Um, I also got to say, I agree. From my outsider's perspective, like I said, I'm not heavy into industry, so it's almost like I have no horse in the race. But I think it's interesting, right? I do agree with you that going back and adding material to the existing blueprints is kind of dumb. I think it would be a cool design if to engage in different kinds of industry. If you say I want to make this kind of ship, you also have to engage in another part of the game. How you gave the example of T3 cruisers and wormholes, which is a good example of that. But there should be a bit more of that, and there should be a bit more dispersion. I'm fine with the idea that hey, and industry, if you want to get into ship production, it's going to be something you're going to have to take some time. You can't just sit in one high sec station. You can't sit in one null sec Sodio and just crank out everything you need and just have it to expect all like work smoothly. I'm okay with the time investment and the complexity investment. In fact, that's probably what would entice me into industry in the first place. The problem is that the resulting product right now and the resulting market that you can put that stuff onto is in a really bad place because the product is weak because of the surgical strike changes. The economy is bad for it because of the awkward place we're in with scarcity in this prosperity quadrant. So I'm hoping that we can get through this prosperity quadrant with maybe a better baseline MER. That like we'll see some better MERs come out that make a bit more sense, and then maybe from there we can actually come back and visit the state of resisting capabilities of ships because it's in just an objectively bad place. We're paying more for less. That has been the story since 2018, 2019 Eve. We've been paying more for less over and over and over, and that's pretty disappointing.
Yeah, that sums it up quite nicely, actually.
So, and Daddy Deep, I do think that maybe we will see a little bit more proliferation from battleships, a little bit more activity from battleship fleets. The problem is right now, I can say in terms of a risk factor for fielding battleships, why don't I bring battleships out on a fleet that I ping or something like that? Hacks. Getting swarmed by hacks, all your battleships are dead.
Yeah,
Because
this
the
one's
hack
got swarmed
projection.
by units so easy.
Yeah, yeah. The hack projection is just out of control. And it's not the same as going up against something like an attack BC, like a tornado fleet, which you can counter. It's not the same as going up against, classic missile boats, which you can counter. The current hack meta with Eagles and Munas especially create this ridiculous projection and damage ratio that
And battleships just have no way to mitigate any
yeah,
of this damage, and even Logi doesn't do that much because resistance is so low, so it doesn't translate to much EHP.
yeah.
I mean, battleships do have that new module that allows it to reduce its signature,
Mm-hmm.
but that hasn't really seemed to help much.
No, it really doesn't help much, and it's
It's
still an
garbage.
expensive battleship, and it's gonna die after the 15 seconds that this thing is gonna cycle. So it's pointless to spend that money on a battleship.
No, it's garbage because the hack fleets also have info links. So you're gonna have info
That
links.
as well.
Yeah, and
Now,
it's gonna counter
the
like if you run it through in
application from a
Python.
hack fleet from medium guns against battleships is just so excellent. The thing is,
Yes, that module can't fix
this
that.
module is maybe gonna protect you from a bomb run, but that's all. It's not gonna
Yes,
protect you from hacks.
and this is a recurring theme. Isn't that interesting? So you bring that up, and I think you're actually right. I think it will protect you from a bomb run. I haven't run the numbers on that in Python. I should. That's an interesting aspect. But over and over again, this happens with these changes where uh, they're attempting to address some problem, real or imaginary, and what they end up doing is nerfing a very specific style or set of styles of gameplay instead of addressing the overall problem that people agreed made the game less fun. I
They
haven't ever
also
seen
removed
someone
the
say,
target spectrum breaker. Which, why didn't they just add this resistance thing? Why did they have to delete the target spectrum breaker? It didn't hurt anyone.
Yeah, yeah.
It was such a fun module for such a weird application style.
Yeah, there's been a lot. There's been a lot of examples like that where playstyles have been removed or nerfed or modules have changed. You know what you're able to get done, and it doesn't actually. I think if you wanted to hand pick out some themes from the past few years that people said, well, this makes it less fun to play. Some of them are bogus, honestly. Like, get it? I shouldn't be ganked in high sec. Yes, you should. There should be nowhere in this game that's safe. Concord is retribution, not protection. All of that. But things like I shouldn't get dropped on by 20 dreads in my 5-man cruiser gang. Fair. I think
Yeah,
that's reasonable. I think
fair.
it should have more
But,
risk and
but then,
expense to do
then
that.
building this ridiculous crusade against capital proliferation as if whaling and small game content, as if everything about it was bad. It's not.
Yes, exactly. There was a way to. We had a path. We had a path during the height of the Rorqual hysteria to fix where things were headed, to correct the course for economy. And the way that could have been done is encouraging these stocks of capitals to get expended, to get used, and then gradually winding down the ratio between how quickly you could restore a cap to your stock, how quickly you could regain a cap either by buying or producing.
I mean, just nerf the goddamn Roku. Close the gap. Not now. 2 years ago, and 5 years ago. Don't even do the gap. But
Well,
close the gap. They came with they came
you
with
know,
that last fucking death block.
so several people have suggested this before, and I always thought it was a great idea, with the Rorqual. I don't think the Rorqual needed to be nerfed per se. I think it should have been much more active. Excavators should work like fighters, and you should have to actually manually cycle. And the reason I say this is because
That would break the multi-boxing aspect.
exactly, exactly. Look, if somebody spends, I know people that have spent an enormous amount of time investment and an enormous personal investment into Eve so that they could have a Rorqual because it's something they really wanted. And they sit there with their one Rorqual, and that's what they do. They provide the boost to the field, and they do the mining with the Excavs back in the day, and that was their ISK generation
True, it still
activity.
doesn't need be. It still doesn't need to be worth 5 exhumus
But
like it was, but like twice as much maybe. That's still
I'd be
worth getting
fine.
into.
So if you think about it, if it had to be used entirely actively, and you can't field 10 of them as one person, then I'd be fine with them being having the output, the mining capability of 5 exhumers, because it should also the cost of way more than 5 exhumers, which for a while it did.
But then the risk of actually losing it isn't that high. So, like, it would be the same as a carrier making 5 times as much as a marauder can do. That would be ridiculous.
Right, right. So if you nerfed, the interesting thing is that so Eve CCP wants to encourage multi-boxing. Of course, it's more paid accounts, and that's how you can get. There's this adage in marketing that it is always easier to sell more of something to the same people than new things to new people. It's just a very common sense kind of statement, right? So multi-boxing is an enticing thing for Eve for CCP to incentivize within Eve, because then they can just go back to the same people and say, hey, you should just pay more to play more. The problem is that the multi-boxing work was so passive and so easy. That's what led to these problems. That's what led to this broken economy, and that could have been fixed by simply making it less possible to do. And that's why I'm so enticed by the idea that others have come up with around this active Oracle activity. I think it would have been
Me
a great
personally,
fix.
when I had my Myrmidon alts active, like 5 of them, it's already getting kind of F40. It always depends. You're sitting there for hours on an evening, chilling out on comms. You don't want to click around so much. So I don't think semi AFK activities are per se bad. But if you can just sit there and eat up an entire belt without doing anything, that's
Exactly.
bad.
Like you can get yourself an Exumer setup or like I said, a Merm setup, things like that are semi AFK, but your reward out of those, your risk per hour, isn't very high.
No, it's not.
And
It, yeah, it
but
right
it's
now it's
fine.
not even worth doing anymore. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I was always fine with these activities. They never created the problem. There is no way we got to the capital proliferation that we did, the capital stocks that we did.
that
Whatever the
was
extent may be.
that
That
was
that
for
never happened
steroids.
because of
Yeah,
Myrmidon
yeah.
Ratters. It never happened because of people in their Vexers. It never happened because of people in their Hulks. It happened because of 12 Rorks fielded by one person who was practically AFK, protected by a massive Titan umbrella. That's how it happened.
Yeah, it's not complicated.
Okay, so Smurf, by the way, circling back to some of the price adjustment and the new components, to create basically, he's saying create some a price adjustment between battleship, battlecruiser, and capital ships. So you have some independent adjustment because of these components not being shared between those. Um, but the stockpiles still exist for one, and
You
two,
could
the
always
attainment.
just tweak the amount of tritanium that goes into this one thing. It's not forbidden.
Yeah, this is CCP's recurring problem is
You don't
that
need
they
you
will.
don't need to have an extra thing. You can just tweak what's
Yes,
already in there.
CCP
What?
is so obsessed with making a new mechanic to fix things instead of using what they have. They made
But
bounty risk
it's like
modifier.
this goddamn tinkering around with the compression mechanic. Right now, people are using this. I can sit there next to some guy's rock crew. If I have anger access, I can compress my ore for myself, take it back, and I got compressed ore in my hull. Like, if they change anything about this, how this works, then how are they gonna supposed to be promoting fleets over solo mining?
Right. Well, we know that
Why are they tinkering
solo mining
around?
is not a
Like,
god-given right, but what are
yeah,
they doing to actually express that?
yeah, but this compression mechanic goes right against this.
It
Why
does
the
actually.
rocket pilot has to do everything manually? No one is gonna use this ever.
No, no. People will take the what is it like a 10% hit or something like that. People will just compress in the Athanor. They'll take the hit.
Yeah, yeah.
Why wouldn't you?
Why would you be sitting there and doing this manually for hours? This is crazy. You could mine more than those 10% in the time you're wasting if you just go to a different belt.
I'm not saying add Trit to Dreads, and I don't think that's what Synderkin was saying either, Smurf, about, adding Trit to Dreads. It's just existing materials within Dreads. You can
And
adjust the
if they just
availability of
wanna
those, which they have
yeah,
been
if they
doing.
wanna adjust the price of that thing, they can change how that thing is built. They don't need to add a special extra component to change something.
The problem is that CCP has so many knobs they can adjust, and so many of their patches, so many of their changes just seem to be let's take 20 knobs and turn them instead of let's take two knobs and turn them and then wait and see what that does. And when I say wait, it doesn't have to be. You don't have to do a wait a whole quarter. You can see a very fast effect if you're observant on the market. God bless the community people, the community devs within CCP. RIP Freebix, who recently left, but God bless them for working on the MER. Freebix would put out that MER, and that would tell you. You could tell in a pretty short order between two MERs what had changed. And even besides that, you can tell from market flux, you can tell from experienced industrialists, the changes can be manifested pretty quickly, and the experience of those changes can be felt pretty rapidly. But when you turn so many of these knobs so rarely per year, it makes it very difficult to adjust to, and it makes it very unclear which knob turning had the most effect, if any. So I'm not really a fan of adding. So someone in chat had talked about like having a maintenance cost to keep them combat ready, that sort of thing. I'm not a fan of any degradation mechanic in Eve. Like people have proposed this before, like oh, for everything in your hangar, you should have to pay like a fee or like it'll decay, that sort of thing.
Imagine you get deployed by the military for a year and you come back to a worthless account. That's the worst
Exactly.
thing ever. What the
Exactly.
fuck?
Yeah. I think it would actually hurt. And again, this will hurt the people who most need the help. The midterm players, the new players. Um I think I think that
If you have a trillion ISK stocked up, then most of that is in blacks, I would assume.
Yeah, it depends. It depends.
Yeah, or
Um,
something shiny like an AT ship here and there, stuff like
yeah,
this.
well, I mean, if you have it liquid, sometimes people put that in Plex, but with the Plex fluctuations, a lot of people exited that position and hold mainly ISK, or they'll hold non-liquid. And a lot of the trillionaires, they got there because of some extreme end non-liquid, like AT ships,
Yeah,
T2 BPOs, stuff like that.
capital stockpiles also
Capital
as
stockpiles,
well.
even,
Yeah,
or capital production from the days when it was much cheaper, and it shouldn't have been that cheap.
yeah.
Um, Yeah, 9 bill super should have never happened. By the way, I think that's pretty inarguable. That just never should have
Yeah,
happened. But
Yeah, but that also wouldn't have happened if the Oracle didn't mine 5 times as much as anything else out there.
if it didn't passively do it, basically, because it was basically passive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I talked to people who are fielding the 10 plus multi-box oracles, and there wasn't that much to do because they knew they would get dropped. There would be a drop, and they would get saved from the same capitals they were enabling the cheap production of. So as
Yeah,
long
but
as you
would,
protected those
would, would
oracles, you
that
would get your
person
Titan replaced.
multibox 50 Oracles? Would they multibox 100 Oracles? I
Yeah,
think it makes a difference if you just seal it off to be a little more effective than an Exuma or something. Make the Exumas more effective at the same time, whatever. I don't know. I'm not
I,
an
I,
industrialist even, and I have
I'm
such
fine with
strong
oracles being
opinions
very
about
high
all
effective.
this.
They're capital ships. They should be a very effective mining ship. It should just require activity and engagement.
Yeah, sure.
That's what I always think about Eve. That's what I always think about any given activity in Eve. I'm fine with it being this maximum of capability if that capability is tied to an active attention. If
Yeah,
it
but
doesn't require
someone
active attention,
making
it
a
should be a low
hundred million
reward.
is ticks with the super carrier. That's a lot of work, like managing bombs and stuff. I can't do that.
Yeah, Rourke Panic. I think Rourke Panic would have been fine if Rourke multi-boxing wasn't so incredibly accessible. If a Rourke required more activity, I'd be fine with having Panic because Dreads, even though most people don't use them, you have a Panic module in your Dread. You have a Panic module in that's a capital module. The emergency hull energizer, right? So having something that gives like this insane amount of tankiness for a time to delay, to prolong rather, protract an engagement so you can get help, I'm okay with that.
I mean, there's also mobile cyanogems, and
Yeah,
if not enough whaling ends kind of satisfying, then CCP can always tweak that, how that's deployed.
so. Uh, all right, what else?
I think that pretty much covers everything we were going to talk about.
All right.
Uh,
Yeah. Oh, actually, one thing I wanted to mention. What's going on in Providence besides DreadBomb losing space there, which we already talked about? That's not everything going on in Providence, right? You have Hero Coalition picking that up, and they're more active than ever. They're pretty new, right? Last year, I think.
yeah, so Hero
This year.
Coalition is basically made up of Banana Republic, which is an ex Dreadbomb Corp headed up by Loki Choco Chips.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they just recently picked up a new corp, and they're just currently setting up operations, getting all figured out, buying a bunch of structures, and just really just starting to really now set up their alliance. So
Yeah.
that's what they're all figuring out.
Yeah, I talked to Loki briefly, and I think it's great, that there's this alliance out there that's actually picking up some steam, trying to make it. Looks like they founded April of this year, and now they have they picked up 7 systems out of Pravi. So I'm kind of interested what's going to happen with this shift in Pravi. So we see hardly competent losing their space in typical hardly competent fashion, and we see it being picked up by a few different groups. So Deep Space Alliance picked up some, Lost Fleet got a little bit. Looks like Rogue Consortium picked up one or two. So Pravi was always this interesting region historically in Eve, right, where you had things like um, the oh, what did they call that rule about not shooting stuff unless it's red? NRDS, not red, don't shoot. There was always this NRDS credo within it. There's always this complex system of standings and protection and things like that. What's the culture like in Pravi currently? I know a few groups have left there recently and have been evicted or have been forced out or have just chosen to withdraw. So, what does the new face of Pravi look like, and what kind of home will it be for some of these smaller groups looking to establish? Because it doesn't look like any of the big blocks. It's not a region you're going to see any big blocks make a major investment in. So, what's Pravi going to look like?
Honestly, I think if Hero is content with taking it, I think Hero's just gonna take over because they're a very competent alliance. They're part of RC. I don't see anyone actually really contesting them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if maybe some of the northern groups decide to come down, you know maybe they might contest them. But other than that, I don't really see much contest currently.
Yeah, I don't know. Looking at the total, all 84 systems in Pravi, looking at the total ownership, I don't see who would really step up. PHW has never really been ones to care about Sov per se. They pretty much hold Sov and systems so that they can base some things and do a little bit of generation. But they've had wildly swinging Sov and they've moved around all kinds of regions in their 10 years, their decade plus of existence. So it's not something where I think we're going to see a heavy investment to try to flip that back. And the groups, the old crowd of Pravi like Severance and things like that, that's long not been a story. So yeah, do you think it'll just basically become a region for Hero Coalition? Do you think they'll be able to pick up enough steam that they can just take the entire thing outright?
I mean, even with their current Steam, I think if they really wanted to, they could. But judging on, I guess, how Loki is, like I think what they're going to do is they're going to start small and they're going to try to take this one step at a time and try to do things. I guess try not to overextend. I think is where what they're really going to focus on,
Yeah,
which I mean is good. Yeah. Overextension can easily be a killer.
yeah. Overextension has been the guilt factor, the problem factor for a lot of groups. And even, we were just talking about DreadBomb and all that space they lost. It was definitely by overextension and trying to turn it into a rental income they couldn't end up maintaining. It reminds me of Intrepid Crossing back in the day. And some other groups, several groups just owned way more space than they ever should have because no one took it. And when they did defend, they had some effective tactics around interesting ways to entosis and some playstyles that unfortunately are long dead. Uh,
Surgical strike.
yeah, it all comes back. Everything is the fault of surgical strike. The new reality is that we can just blame everything on surgical strike. But um,
But it's true. You cannot do as much as you used to with a small gang of decent pilots. It just doesn't make that much of a difference.
who is Sindraken Retro? Sindraken is our distinguished guest. We've been talking about how surgical strike made the game terrible. Game is dying. Game is terrible. We're all unsubbing, and nobody's ever gonna play. The game is gonna finally die, and etc. And all the things that you're supposed to say about Eve, and then it keeps on going.
Eve will finally be dead.
Yeah, yeah. We can only hope, right? It'd be like a freedom. Let's all win Eve together. But seriously, PvP is only fun right now because we as players make it so. There's not really a lot that
it's
CCP
always been
is.
like this. Like
It's always been like this.
Found reasons to shoot each other, and like this entire war has been keeping CCP afloat. Really, people would have been rage quitting much sooner if this war hadn't been going on.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really the challenging era we're in right now, right? This is why people got so mad about the changes. The war isn't there to
This is why
distract
the
people
PCU
anymore.
is going down in winter, which has never been happening before.
Yeah, yeah. It's never. You're right. It has never happened that we've seen a decline in a wintertime
Yeah,
decline
you expect
in
the
player
influx
base.
from all the people who don't spend time outdoors this time of the year, and
Yes.
it's not happening because everyone is pissed off.
Yep. Yep. And because people are hearing that they should be pissed off. Even if they don't know why, or even if they don't have the same association or the same stakes, they hear, "Oh, I'm supposed to be pissed off by this," so you get pissed off. That's kind of like what I said about
And it's
people
easy enough to
protesting
find
in Jeddah.
something else to do over the holidays. It's not that hard to find a video game to play.
Yep. Yep. There's more competition. Competition is stiffer than ever, and it will continue to be. And I think that CCP really needs to have a respect here about what they should be doing for the sake of their player base.
Yeah,
And
not tinker around with meaningless systems and stuff. Just fix the issues that do exist, and then give us something interesting.
mm-hmm.
Like the last great success was the introduction of the Triclavian ships.
Wow. So
Everything
you'd have
since
to
then
go all
was
the way back
kind
to
of
that to say it was the last good
everything
change.
since then was kind of mediocre. Like, okay, Pochwin got people excited, but
Mm.
then yeah, Edencom got kind of ditched in the corner.
Yeah. The
And
I like Pochvan. I like the content that it brings. I think it was a needed change. I think it's cool. There's just so much wasted
it's
potential there,
something
especially
for
as a lore
people to
nerd. I
do.
really
It's
got to
it's
say that the
a
potential
yeah,
is.
it's a special play style, and if people enjoy this, that's great. But like, if everything around it is going to shit, that's not so great.
Yep. Yes. And Mastaris makes a great point that we got the AT, that not being a new thing, but we got it back and we got someone committed to
Yeah,
saying get an
AT
AT.
was fun. Sadly, I
Uh,
didn't get to fly too many matches, but oh my god, just the
yeah.
just the training and preparation and all the stuff around it. That was an amazing
It
experience, and
was
I'm
a
glad that
fantastic
that.
experience.
And shout out to CCP Aurora. She did a great job just
Yes.
making this happen.
But
I'm
see, that's
I'm
the
I'm
interesting
glad
thing, right?
this
Is
happened.
that wasn't a change to the game.
It wasn't a change to game. That was a
The
change to
game, the
CCP policy to bring something back they abandoned 2 years ago. Thank you for
exactly.
that.
That was basically one person's. Not that she's the only person who worked in it.
No,
Blessings to
not at all.
Convict and
And
blessings to the Eve and T staff and all those people who did amazing work. It's
yeah,
not
the entire tournament community and everyone
everyone
who
who
worked
put
together
into
to
it.
make this
Just
happen. This
absolutely,
was fucking great.
it was fantastic. Just a genuinely great moment for Eve, but it wasn't a change to the game. It was an improvement to the fundamentals of the game. So the last good improvement to the fundamentals of the game, I have to head scratch and think about. I'd have to go back and look at past, dev blogs from the 2019 and 2018 period to figure out what that might be because it has just been on a decline on that side, and that's so unfortunate because it's such a compelling and great game, and it seems to me that the mindset
and,
required to
and
fix it
like
is so
and like
simple.
small changes here and there. If
Yes.
you go back to like making scanning persistent when you change a system, if you go back to like even arguably the bookmarking system, now that has some drawbacks,
Mhm. Mhm.
but like quality of life changes
Yeah,
here
there's
and
been
there,
some really
and
good
those
quality of
little
life stuff.
balance
You're right.
changes, like what they did to heavy missiles, what they do with the bombers and torpedoes, I generally like. Maybe they overdid it a bit harshly on the battleships, but that's surgical strike again.
Yeah. Yeah.
It,
Well,
a lot of the little things, but the grand ongoings and scarcity, that was just garbage.
and I don't feel great about the set of changes coming out, but I think they will. I know CCP has backpedaled on several things. I've been watching Hobo Leaks to see when the next Singularity patch hits and what the diffs are. And I think I personally predict we're going to see like the whole like complexity of the mining crystals get like super reduced, like T1, T2 crystals, and so it's
Yeah, that's
ABC,
actually
purple,
something
green,
good.
blue,
Like,
whatever.
that's something good to say about these changes. The simplification of the refinement and mining crystals, that's a positive. The waste mechanic in the modules is kind of a mess, but the waste mechanic in the crystals is a positive, I would say, per se. You give
Yeah,
this
see,
choice to me. But the fact that they had to stuff it into the modules kind of causes all of these issues. Now you're gonna promote venture bots with Tech 1 modules over Tech 2 modules. That's ridiculous.
yes, yeah.
So just stick it in the crystals alone,
Uh,
please.
unlike
And
unlike
barges getting buffed, that's great.
yeah, I'm all for. I
The
always
gap
thought exhumers should be a
closing,
bit
that's
more than they are.
great.
Well,
Closing the gap, yeah, thank
the
you for that.
the barges didn't even get
Messing up the procurer is sad.
exactly. The barges didn't even get directly buffed, right? It was a set of
Yeah,
trades. It's like this constant set of trades, and I'm fine with it. I don't believe in only buffing. That goes back to me criticizing the
not
WoW
only
approach, where you
buffing,
just keep buffing and
but
buffing. But
leaving a third mid slot in there is not a buff. It's just a different
there's no
balancing choice.
there's nothing that Procure gained out of this that makes it worth losing a mid slot. There's
Yeah,
nothing that the game suffers
absolutely.
from by the Procure having an extra mid slot, and by extra I just mean the one
I
it
mean,
had
right now
before.
it's 4. Yeah, yeah,
Like there's nothing that the game suffers. There is no economic imbalance. All it does is remove a play style, and it is CCP's belief that industrial PvP ships shouldn't happen. Because I think
yeah.
bait
That's
Nereus's
the
are
thing. I
hilarious.
mean,
I think bait
what's gonna
procurers are
happen to the
awesome.
game if yeah, bait? That's gonna be exciting.
It's the
Now you
off
have
meta
just a
stuff
bunch
that's
of
super
barges,
exciting.
and there is only the one choice to warp off or get ganked.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you get from 95% people warping off to 99% people warping off, and hunting is getting even more boring. And what's gonna happen to Nosec?
Yep.
So kinda all of these changes accumulate, and it's just, yeah, obviously not a good thing that's happening.
So I was looking back at the surgical strike marketing blog. Like they always put out a blog, talking about a patch level, and then they put out the dev blog that actually talks about the changes being done. And uh, like you said, their effort was, they said, was to bring capital survivability more in line with the rest of New Eden,
Yeah,
reducing the
and of
overwhelming
course,
power of logistics.
Brawler's Paradise. It's not what
But
they said it would be.
then what happens is the very first change that happens is a 20% reduction in all resistance modules. Now, for sure, that makes capitals less survivable, but it doesn't make any sense to make capitals less survivable if everything else is less survivable too, because capitals will still be more survivable. If you have $10 and I have $1, and we say let's take $1 away from everybody, now I have $0 and you have $9. How,
Yeah,
how did that make it work? Like this is very obvious stuff, but this is the kind of problem, and the real thing is that.
battleships getting pretty much one shot
Mhm.
by torpedoes and by horde raids, obviously too. So that's not a buff.
Yes, absolutely. Battleships, surgical strike hurt battleships worse than any other ship, in my
Oh my god,
opinion.
so bad.
Like it feels so bad to feel battleships now.
There's some situations where you can just put out crazy amounts of damage, especially lasers at medium range are getting kind of crazy, but it's so bad when you take damage.
So
And you're
what
not
changes do
mobile. You're not, yeah.
Retro wanted to know in chat, what changes do we want to see? So I'll say for me what I wanted to see from this, if I'm gonna armchair quarterback into Isha's version of surgical strike, what would it look like? First of all, you change hulls, not modules. With the exception of a few modules that are specific to certain kinds of ships that may have uh, that may be in maybe overtuned. Um, but I think mainly you affect hulls and not modules. I think that you also, when you say this kind of gameplay activity, in this case capital warfare, is too strong, sometimes what you need to do is you need to make other things strong as well, not just take something and make it weak. Just like I'm against a system of infinite buffs, I'm also against a system of infinite nerfs. You need to counterbalance. What I actually thought Surgical Strike period could have been great for is it would have been a great time to buff battleship gameplay while nerfing capital gameplay, and then bringing it into a line and then looking for a way to tie in how do you deal with the hack meta? And I think you deal with the hack meta by limiting their projection. I think that's pretty obvious. If you can limit the projection of hacks, then you bring them into a point where they actually make a little bit more sense as a ship, since their whole point is extreme burst tankiness. They can have to use that burst tankiness because they don't have the absurd projection they had, which now means battleships can take them on because battleships can take them on through sustaining versus burst tank, and then they can work on how you can. Then the players can start building a meta around how you can answer hack fleets with something besides hack fleets, and then they can also build a meta around how battleships can become more important in subcap warfare than just dropping dreads on everything.
Yeah. Also, a simple thing they could have done is just give Capital
Yes.
separate resistance modules.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, I think that could have even fit into Tiericide, by
Yeah.
by
Capital
removing some of
size
the meta around.
resistance modules.
Yeah,
It's easy.
yeah.
You
Just
can, yeah.
size out resistance modules
It's
for them.
also an elegant way to adjust the pricing of capital ships without actually messing up industry.
Yes, and that's an interesting way that you could create new tuning knobs, right? If CCP really wants to create more tuning knobs, that's an interesting way you could have done it. And Camper's absolutely right, by the way, that T2 hacks got stronger from Surgical Strike, not
Yeah,
weaker,
absolutely.
because the
Absolutely.
gap, and you had mentioned this
The gap
before
just got
at the opening,
enlarged.
Sindraken. Yeah, because anything that now had an innate ability, which is capital halls, faction halls, T2 halls, got stronger and stronger because you couldn't close that gap any better.
Yeah,
And
you just get snatched off the field much faster. It's fair.
yes, it really is an unfortunate set of changes. The changes I want to see are ones that involve a risk versus reward and a specialization of ship capabilities. I believe that hacks should be short range vessels. I,
Yeah,
I,
the
I,
first
I
thing they should
strongly
do
believe
is
that.
just restore 20% resistance. It's just as they took it away, just put it back.
I don't.
Change the way capital resistances work, or I don't care, change the hulls, change the modules, I don't care. It's some of that.
The interesting thing is that I don't think that the resistances of a given capital were ever as much of an issue as how many capitals could be brought to that field. And you could have adjusted how many capitals could be brought to that field without touching the resist profile. But if anything, if you want to mess with cap resist, fine, mess with cap resist. But of all the different ways we've come up with to do that, do it in some way that doesn't affect every resist in the game, or you're not even making a change. All this change did was made it worse for the mid tier and the new player.
It
That's what
just
it
got
effectively
much
did.
more extreme, much more extreme and faster. Like the whole strategic aspect got hurt in the small end, in the medium end, and didn't make anything more interesting.
Yep, I agree with you. All right. I want to start heading towards wrapping up with something that CCP did fairly recently that I actually thought was kind of cool, and I don't think it got a lot of promotion or notice, but I thought it was actually pretty nice, and that's the universe.eveonline.com, and that was their new way of organizing the lore, trying to bring back. So Eve Online, for those that have been playing longer, may remember that you used to be able to get tons of lore. You used to be able to learn tons about the background lore of Eve by going to the Eve Online website, and for years it's been missing. If you go into the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, you can find these old pages that would tell you about like the crew sizes on a Titan, would tell you about how Sanchez came to be and all of this stuff. And there's just this really cool lore stuff, and just kind of added to the game, added to the feel and the atmosphere of the game. And it's just been sorely missing from CCP themselves for a long time. So they launched universe.eveonline.com. And the reason it got crowded out, the reason it didn't get the praise or notice, is because they announced it at the same time they announced the Prosperity Quadrant, which is such a cluster that, yeah, this just gets dwarfed. But it's actually pretty nicely arranged. It's a pretty cool setup. It talks about you can read about the empires in New Eden. You can read about the chronicles, which are like the history of Eve and everything, and then also incorporate stuff from the scope, which is like the ongoing in-game news sort of thing. Um, it's a pretty nice site if you haven't checked it out, and I think it's actually pretty well arranged. I would like to see. I think the lore of Eve is actually really cool. I think some very cool like deep stuff hidden inside the lore that you don't really get to see come out in the game. I would like to see them create more engagement around this. I'd also like to see them put a little bit more of that into the game itself. For a while, they were making an effort to do that. Around the time of if you think like the release of the Triglavians, that was the last big lore push that the game really reflected. You could say Pochvan, but that was really the last big lore push that the game had. But I always like the lore pushes, and I think that there's a depth you can add to the game like that, and an excitement, and it at a lower development cost. So I think it's something that should be considered. And I threw that link in the chat, by the way. But I think universe.eveonline.com is pretty well designed. I think going into some of that would be pretty cool, and I think it'd be pretty cool for Eve to bring that out and to encourage a little bit more for a while they were really encouraging content creators to kind of do some non-canonical lore type stuff. They were like even to the point I remember CCP promoting some third-party people who had made like some Eve universe books and Eve universe fiction and things like that. I'd like to see a little bit more of that because I think it drives community engagement, and so hopefully this is a positive step in that direction.
Yeah, it's the little things. Also, they're doing the community beat now. That's always kind of nice. Except the last one, they didn't mention the JITA protests. That's sad.
Yeah, I thought that was actually in poor taste for them not to mention it. I think they should have. I don't know why you wouldn't. It's like the perfect outlet to acknowledge those protests without actually
Yeah,
changing anything. And I don't mean that cynically. I don't mean that like oh they shouldn't change anything or they won't change anything. I'm just saying that's a time they could have made an acknowledgement. Because in the past they have done that. Burn Jita had was accompanied by Scope News and things like that. And yeah, Camper, I know what you're talking about. Those lore events, they were cool, and
yeah,
we still have events and
absolutely.
stuff,
And
but they're
it's
not.
kind of bad taste not to say anything at all.
Yeah, that it should have been acknowledged. It should have been acknowledged, and
Yeah, not just in response to an interview from some obscure gaming website.
yes, yes, exactly. I think there needs to be an effort for CCP now more than ever to acknowledge their community. I have always been a big believer that CCP should not just bend to every outcry the community has, because if Reddit balanced Eve, it would be an even worse game than we can possibly imagine. But I do
Yeah,
believe
but
you need to
this has been
acknowledge.
going on 2 years, the scarcity stuff now,
Yes,
and CSP is just going la la la.
yes, it's been
It's
it's
not
been.
okay. It's not okay to treat your customers in a way like this. Period.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you. It needs to be acknowledged. Well, we really appreciate your time, Sindraken. Definitely some great thoughts, and
Oh, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
oh yeah, absolutely. It was great having you. Any other thoughts, Sindraken, Kurama?
No, I think that about covers everything.
Thoughts and prayers. Special shout out to my chemical and AMOC brethren. AMOC.is recruiting. Indeed, we are.
Good, good to know. Good to know. I think if
And
I
feel free to visit in SoftDev if you're looking for some small game content.
if I ever wanted to join the evil horrid Imperium, it would actually be a mock dot. So you can put me on record as saying that. Um,
I will do.
you can put me. Yeah, there's been attempted poachings, but no, I do have respect for AMOC dot and their interest in actually doing some small gaming. Fancy Pants is recruiting if you wanna join the good coalition, but all the same, whatever you're doing in Eve, hopefully you have fun with it. Hopefully you can make some content and weather this insanity going on. And hopefully CCP starts to listen and starts to implement changes that make sense on a scale that makes sense rather than just drastic sets of things that have a disconnection from their customer. Grr goons indeed. All right. Thanks everybody. We appreciate as always everyone coming and attending and listening. And anything else? Kurama, anybody?
Just wanted to say that Pandemic Horde is also recruiting. Pandemic Horde Inc., as well as Dreadit and Karma Fleet.
Everybody is recruiting. Everybody is hoping you can
Yeah, but
save this game
Test
through
is
your activity
homeless.
and your
What
undocking.
to join Test? Sorry, I can't help myself.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming out. It's been a good show as always, and we will see you next Sunday.
I actually had another outro.
Oh, go.
All right. Well, guys, if hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you see, new and post streams e-related content throughout the week, including Trash Talk Tuesday on Tuesday, Latest and Lace on Thursday. I'm pretty sure there's a Friday show. I don't know. Serious Slander Saturday on Saturdays, and of course between two Keep Stars on Sunday. Remember to always bubble wrap your Keep Stars, and we'll see you next time.
See
Fly
you around.
safe.